Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо роботу. До слова запрошується речник.
We continue our working day. Now the floor is given to the Ministry of Defense spokesman on ATO-related issues, Colonel Andriy Lysenko. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Now the information about the events in the ATO area during the last 24 hours. For the second day of Christmas ceasefire, the situation is characterized by escalation and the increase of the activity of the enemy, mainly in Donetsk and Mariupol area. The main flash spots are Lugansk and Shirokino. The Lugansk area, there it was relatively calm. The enemy delivered 3 short-term shelling in Stanitsa Luganska and Novozvanivka. The Donetsk area. Starting 7 in the morning, the enemy started shelling of our positions in Lugansk, and during the second part of the day, the enemy introduced armored vehicles and mortars, and during the day, enemy shelling lasted with interruptions for about 7 hours. The occupants also violated ceasefire along Gorlovka perimeter, that is Zaitsevo-Verkhnyataretska part of front line, but there the situation is much better. To the south of Verkhnyataretsk, in the region of Avdiivka and the Donetsk airport, it was absolutely calm for the first time in several months. On the whole, during 24 hours in the Donetsk area, there were 14 enemy shelling, including 4 with the use of heavy weapons. The Mariupol area, in Marienka and suburbs, it was calm. There was 1 enemy shelling in Novotroitsk and 1 in Starognatovka. And in Pavlopil-Shirokino part of front line, the situation is tense. As before Christmas ceasefire, the enemy massively uses mortars and sporadically uses cannons. And yesterday, the enemy opened fire at about 10 in the morning, and shelling lasted until the evening. And the enemy launched about 40 mines of different caliber at our positions and several shells. On the whole, during the last 24 hours in the Mariupol area, there were 16 enemy shelling, including 6 with the use of heavy weapons. Yesterday, in the region of ATO, the enemy organized 1 flight of air drone. During the last 24 hours, in the result of the military actions, no Ukrainian servicemen killed, 5 were wounded. Confirmed losses of the enemy during the last week, starting 19th of December, 18 occupants killed and 38 were wounded, lion's share in Svetlodarsk Bulge. Speaking in more detail about the detachment of Russian occupation forces, we have such statistics. So-called 2nd Brigade of the enemy Lugansk area, 1 wounded. So-called 7th Brigade of the enemy Svetlodarsk Bulge, 15 killed, 32 wounded. And so-called 9th Regiment, Mariupol area, 3 killed, 5 wounded. Taking into account the big losses of the enemy between Svetlodarsk and Debaltseva, in local hospitals, places is lacking for killed and wounded militants. That's why they are brought to different hospitals in the occupied territory. In civilian hospitals in Lugansk, they introduced limited access mode for visitors, and morgue is full with bodies of dead militants. And in occupied parts of Lugansk Oblast, they continue to discharge civilians in order to have place for wounded militants. And these days in Mariupol, servicemen of National Guard of Ukraine detained a suspect who is suspected of financing the militants, and he was handed into police. 1 more militant returned to peaceful life. Ukrainian court released him from criminal responsibility. This is the resident of Lugansk. He joined the militants at the start of military actions in the east, then he fled. And he got information about SBU program that they wait for you back home, and he addressed Ukrainian law enforcement. After verification, he returned return to peaceful life without robberies and other criminal actions. Thank you very much. Do you have questions? Yes, there is a question. Dmitry Moroz, Fifth Channel. Could you please specify among those 5 wounded, where were they wounded, and what about the severity of their wounds? We don't have such an information, but about the geography, Lugansk 1 in course of shelling. Lugansk 3 wounded, shell-shocked in course of shelling, and Verkhnetoretsk 1 wounded also in the course of shelling. Thank you.
Шановні колеги,
Dear colleagues, our next event is at 4 p.m.